Well, some La Nina year this has turned out to be. Did you know there's a northeast side to Mount Hood? Did you know there's an old hotel on the northeast side of Mount Hood that's like over 40 years older than Timberline Lodge? It's called Cloud Cap. Look it up. We'll talk about Cloud Cap some other time, though. The best way to get to Tilly Jane from the Portland metro area is to avoid the thicket of traffic and amateurs in Government Camp and go through the gorge to Highway 35. From Highway 35, turn right on Cooper Spur Road. Go ahead. Try and pass the gravel truck. I dare you to try and pass the gravel truck. Don't actually try to pass the gravel truck. When you get to this sign, follow the road to the right toward the Cooper Spur ski area. Keep going until you see this parking area. The ski area is up to the left and the trailhead is to your right. Although this side of the mountain doesn't get used as heavily as Government Camp, I still strongly suggest you get here before 9 o'clock a.m. if you want any guarantee of finding parking on a weekend. The Tilly Jane Trail gains 1,800 feet in 3 miles if your goal is just to get to the A-frame. It's not obscenely steep by hiking or skiing standards, but it does do in 3 miles what Cloud Cap Road does in 11 miles for what it's worth. I can't decide if this is easier or harder than the Glade Trail, but it definitely fits squarely in that beginner to intermediate category, if for no other reason than the fact that it's an out and back, so you can turn around at any time. The elevation of the trailhead is under 4,000 feet, so in this era of climate change, if it isn't a heavy snow year, coverage can be a bit of an issue as you get closer to the beginning of the trail. For us, the lack of snow coverage presented a bigger challenge on the way back than it did on the way up the hill. It doesn't feel like the trail ever really gets particularly steep in this first section. You'll notice the steepness more on the way down because the corridor is so narrow. It's only later, above the A-frame, when we were nearer the tree line, that parts of the trail did actually get challenging, which I'll cover in a minute. But down here, the trail really feels pretty mellow. It's sort of just a nice bench trail through a nice forest. Nothing to complain about and a lot to love about it. After the first 1.5 miles, the trail breaks out onto exposures created by the Gnarl Ridge fire back in 2008. Now, I agree that it's sad to see forests burn, but forest fires are part of a natural cycle, and for that matter, most of the fires on this side of Mount Hood were started by lightning. It's helpful to reframe this not as devastation, but as nature doing some thermal redecorating. The forest is recovering, and until it does, there are much better views than there were before the conflagration. Seriously, on the forested slopes of the Cascades, fires and clear cuts are often the only way you're ever going to get views of the landscape below and above, so take the good with the bad here. Proceeding upward, you can either stay on the ridge where the main trail is, or you can climb through the canyons on either side of the main trail, assuming the snow conditions are accommodating, of course. If there's good coverage and the snow isn't too sticky, climbing up through the canyon affords a nice change in scenery. Keep the ridge line that the trail follows in view, though, so that you can side hill out of the canyon at any time if there are issues. In our case, the snow was sticky and the coverage wasn't ideal, which left a lot of branches poking up above the snow that were catching edges, so we opted to get back on the main trail. This traverse isn't going to be very much fun on the way down. Your snowboarder friends will not be pleased with it, as there is a short section of grade reversal in here, which you're just going to swear about if you're on skis, but you'll be waiting for your snowboarding companions to walk out of here. I guess just keep that in mind. The burned out forest through here doesn't create much of a windbreak, which means it's probably best to check the weather forecast before heading up here, as you'll be getting pelted pretty hard by wind drift if the breeze kicks up over 15 miles an hour. This is wilderness area, so the forest is being left to recover on its own, which means it's going to be a while before there are enough juvenile trees of appreciable size that can act as a windbreak again. One of the things I really liked about this trail is that route finding was never really an issue. It was always readily apparent how to stay up on the ridge and on track. Although this side of the mountain is less frequented than the trails radiating out of Government Camp, the usage that this side of the mountain does get is concentrated on fewer trails, this being one of them. I argue that for winter recreation, that's actually a good thing, as it's easier not to get lost and there's more likely to be someone to help if you do get yourself into trouble. If you're one of those stubborn fools who likes to ski alone, this would be one of the safer places to do it. Eventually, there will be one last steep grade as you enter into the small patch of woods they were able to save around the Tilly Jane A-frame, and in an amount of time that feels almost as soon as you began, you'll find yourself at the A-frame. Considering the road that gets you to the same place in the summer is 11 miles long, it would seem that this is another one of those destinations where hiking up, honestly, is the pleasanter option. Seriously though, this doesn't feel like an excessively long hike at all. I mean, I guess it's not really a long hike, right? The Tilly Jane A-frame was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the late 1930s and is part of the guard station complex up here that includes a few cabins, a nifty little campground, and an amphitheater. Up until less than a decade ago, the A-frame shelter was just left unlocked and open to the public. There was a wood lot out back with an axe and a couple of wedges, and you could go in and light a fire in the stove. Then the internet happened to it. Now it's gated. You have to get reservations to sleep here. I actually slept alone in this shelter one September night before they gated it, and it's definitely rustic inside. I actually didn't make it through the whole night in here because there was a rat scurrying through the walls of the place while I was trying to sleep. I descended from the sleeping loft to find fresh rat droppings all over the stove and table I had just cleaned an hour earlier with water I'd hauled in from the creek. That was unpleasant. First, I moved my sleeping pad out to the balcony, but still being a little bit freaked out about the possibility of getting hantavirus or something, whatever it is you get from rat droppings which on closer inspection were all over the place. I finally just opted to walk back to my car over at Cloudcap Inn, take a couple of sunrise pictures and drive home. But yeah, you can reserve this cabin and spend the night in it if you want. Hopefully the rat's not still there. You can turn around at the A-frame and head back down the hill if the weather looks to not be cooperating, but if it looks like it might be decent, you should just keep going up the hill. When you get past the amphitheater, where you see my friend Jocelyn here cutting a path to the left up through another canyon, you can also go to the right, which will take you over to Cloudcap Inn, which you shouldn't miss if you haven't seen it before. If you're on snowshoes, that should be your final destination before turning around. If you're not on skis or a split board, there's really no particular reason to proceed any higher unless you're going to summit Mount Hood. This canyon here is where I really just fell in love with this place. No matter what mode of travel I'm using to move through the backcountry, my favorite thing to do is just poke around and explore. And Tilly Jane is a great place to do that. You can wind your way through these canyons and just kind of play. So it's a playful place. Now, you may be wondering how this place got the name Tilly Jane in the first place. Well, like a lot of things on Mount Hood, it has a lot to do with rich people from Portland. The area was named for Tilly Jane Ladd, the wife of William Ladd, perhaps best known today for the neighborhood in southeast Portland that bears his name, Ladd's Addition. This area was the first snob playground on Mount Hood for the well-heeled elite of Portland, Oregon. When they weren't busy playing rich snob games at the Multnomah Athletic Club, they were up here, summiting Mount Hood from the east side and naming things after their wives. As I was saying, you can kind of just poke around in the woods up here. It's relatively easy to route find and stay on track. Mostly it's just a game of finding the most efficient way up the hill without trapping yourself at the bottom of anything ridiculously steep. This is one of those areas that's just pretty. It's just pretty no matter what time of year you're up here. I've been up here in just about every season and never been unhappy that I was here. This side of Mount Hood is really kind of grossly underappreciated. Eventually, the little trails that meander through the woods will kind of funnel you to this narrow little canyon. I think there's actually a little creek under here, but I'm not entirely sure of that. I'll have to come check it out during the summer again to verify. It does get a bit steeper in this canyon for what it's worth. Just keep that in mind. Do also be mindful of how you're going to get yourself out of this canyon if you don't plan to skin all the way to the top of it. We got ourselves into kind of a pickle trying to exit this. I wouldn't call this my proudest moment on skis, but when you're head first into a rabbit hole, sometimes you've got to get resourceful to get yourself back out of it. I got lucky there was a pretty firm layer of snow about 1.5 feet down. The top of this canyon does encroach on the alpine zone, and therefore the weather does get somewhat more dramatic. Even if it wasn't windy at the bottom, it could be pretty breezy and even downright whiteout up here. Again, keep your wits about you and know how you're going to bail out back to the A-frame. Because as anybody who's an experienced skier knows, there's no worse vertigo than whiteout vertigo. So pay close attention to the conditions so you don't become a newspaper story. If the weather is behaving itself, you can totally keep climbing up past the tree line. Theoretically, there's nothing stopping you. In our case, it was clear that it was periodic whiteout with wind-blown ice pellets above the tree line, so we set a goal of like a little grove of trees and then just turned around there. Always turn around before it gets nasty. You don't want to be peeling off skins and packing up your yard sale in the middle of a blizzard. This place is actually kind of a fun little playground with big open runs that kind of feel like the big glades you'll see in a commercial ski area. I once skied this area with a friend in early June. Of course, we hiked up to Cooper Spur and then skied down, but I would definitely recommend this as a winter destination. Boys in their early 20s do stupid things. The slope feels a little bit shallow up here, and while that's good for keeping the avalanche danger manageable, it's sort of awkward on powder days if your skis aren't built for powder. Snowboarders kind of get the advantage up here. The day I rode this, I definitely had way more weight on my tails than I'm comfortable with. But then you can drop back into the canyon, and although I know it's sacrilege to say so, I really kind of like riding canyons like this when they've gotten tracked out just a little bit. Anyhow, this is a fun little treat, and it's a good thing you climbed up this far, because this is nice. This route is an out and back, so there are no surprises on the way back down. There's not really much to say. Below the cabin, you can sort of explore some of the canyons, but you have to take care to stay on the fall line that keeps you on the trail so you can make it back to the car. I actually ended up having a lot more fun on this descent than I was anticipating, as there are some relatively steep little sections, and the narrowness of the trail actually kind of adds to the fun, as long as you're keeping your eye out for uphill travelers. You'll definitely have more fun on this descent if you just accept that you're not going to be blasting through thigh-deep powder back to the parking lot. It's just sort of skidding your way down a trail with other people on it and having a friendly winter stroll where you just happen to be wearing skis. Be friendly and have fun in here, and don't be in a hurry. Never be in a hurry to do anything. Eventually, we ran out of snow and had to take off our boards for about 1/8 of a mile. That won't always happen, though. It just happened to us on the day we rode it because we'd been having a mild winter so far. We just didn't have the greatest snow coverage. It is what it is. I did put the skis back on again, which was awesome, but you've still got to be careful in here. It's a little too steep for how narrow the corridor is. Don't let that dissuade you, though. Just know what you're getting yourself into. You should know anyway, since you climbed up this on the way down. Although things do always look different with the changed perspective of pointing down the hill. When you get to this split, the trail that goes off to the right, if you're looking down the hill, leads to the Cooper Spur ski area. This is a good option if there's low coverage on the trail, and it's the route we took. There's a little bit of boot packing over about 1/3 of a mile to get to the ski area if you do choose this option. Cooper Spur seems nice. It's definitely a good place to bring a beginner. We were just using it to get back to the car. I wouldn't plan a whole weekend here, but if I was teaching kids to ski, I would definitely consider this ski area. If we'd gone down the Tilly Jane Trail instead of through the ski area, then obviously we'd have ended up right back where we started. But if you did descend through the ski area, then there's going to be a walk down the road to the left to get back to the car. And here's where you'll be really glad you don't have to fight traffic getting out of government camp, because the parking lot here was like deserted at 3:30 p.m. Compared to the other side of the mountain, this is like bizarro world. Remember to check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/voiceovertrails and sign up to support more trail guides like this one. A very special thank you goes out to Damon Corey, my only Lomi Goodness level patron. And I'd also like to thank my Hero Dirt level sponsors, Heather Van Valkenburg, Jason Moore, Ty Morgan Marbett, and Todd McCarthy. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And as always, get out there and go shred some pow.